Welcome, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on WIOA State Plan Modifications from a Disability Perspective, Recommendations for Ensuring Inclusion and Equal Opportunity in State Plan Updates. I'm Rebecca Salon, Project Director of the LEAD Center. I want to give you a little logistics before we start. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen it by going to the communication menu at the top of the screen and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you don't have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, there are numbers posted on the screen that you can dial, and there's a meeting code that is also available. That information is also under event information. You don't need an attendee ID in order to join. Real-time captioning is provided during the webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize other panels like chat, Q&A, and/or participants. We will have a question and answer part of the webinar. Please use the chat box or Q&A box to send any questions you have during the webinar, and we will direct the questions accordingly during the Q&A portion as time permits. If you're listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing questions to Aramide Oshika, and her email address is aawosika@ndi-inc.org. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and materials will be placed on the LEAD Center website at the link provided so that you'll be able to access them afterwards. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host, Aramide Oshika, or you may email her at aawosika@ndi-inc.org. For those of you who may be new to the LEAD Center, we are the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities. We're a collaborative of disability workforce and economic empowerment organizations led by National Disability Institute with funding from the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. Our mission is to advance sustainable individual and systems level change that results in improved competitive integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for people across the spectrum of disabilities. And we've provided our website link there. We'd like to start this webinar, which we're very excited about, by introducing Christopher Button, who's the supervisor of the Workforce System Policy Team at the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. Chris? And you may be muted.
Thank you, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. On behalf of ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and also the Department of Labor at large, I want to welcome everyone to the webinar today. We are so excited about it. I understand from our LEAD Center staff that we have, close to 450 sites that are registered on the webinar today, so that's a lot of people who are listening in, and that's a great thing because what we're going to be talking about today is so important. Some years ago, ODEP did some research where we looked at a piece of law and we looked at the word disability in the law, and then we traced that word and how it impacted what ultimately happened at the local level. And what we found is if a word appeared in the law, It was understandably more likely to appear in the regulations for implementing the law. It was more likely to appear in the guidance that came out from the federal level. It was more likely to appear in the state plan that the state organized to implement the law. It was more likely to appear in the state level guidance and technical assistance, and ultimately how it all translated at the local level, where boots on the ground, people with disabilities are seeking employment. There was a greater probability that people with disabilities were going to have a meaningful and effective experience with the system that they were working with. So what we are talking about today is really, really important. We at ODEP were so excited that the WIOA really expanded the references to disability throughout the law. And what you guys are doing as you create your state plans really can impact how services are implemented at the local level for youth and adults with disabilities. So thank you. Thank you to our speakers today from ETA and our speakers from South Carolina and from WINTAC, and also, of course, to our lead technical assistance center staff, because we're really excited about this webinar today. So I'm going to give it back to you, Rebecca. Thank you very much. I guess I'm giving it back to Michael now. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chris, and I'm glad to take us the rest of the way. My name is Michael Morris. I'm the policy team leader for the LEAD Center and also the director of the National Disability Institute. I'm pleased to have multiple speakers with us who will share their expertise on WIOA. Heather Fleck with the Employment and Training Administration, Robert Kite, also with the Employment and Training Administration, Andy Arias with the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and then we will also bring you from South Carolina to give you one state example, Kyle Walker with the South Carolina Commission for the Blind, Margaret Allewine with the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Agency, and Nina Staggers with the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce. We also will bring you Doug Keese, Project Director for the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, part of NDI, and WINTAC, which is a subcontract from folks at San Diego State University. Our agenda today is to provide you an overview of requirements from the Employment and Training Administration, to hear from one state example, the three individuals representing both the Vocational Rehabilitation System and the Workforce Development System from South Carolina, Doug Keese, who is working with VR agencies across the country, and also to hear from Andy Arias, who will share with you an extraordinary website, the DRIVE website, which can give you a great deal of information resources that can be helpful in the review and update of any state WIOA Unified plan. We will have time for questions, and we'll close out with some recommendations for you. Again, you can use the chat box to put questions in. We'll start with some questions we have pre-prepared today. Our objectives is for you to understand the 2-year modification requirements for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, Unified and Combined State Plans. Those are due March 15th. Discuss expectations from a disability perspective. Review and highlight for you some ideas for promising practices you might incorporate in your state. Listen to our group of presenters from South Carolina to understand their efforts at cross-system collaboration, and discuss technical assistance that's available through a variety of sources and promising practices that you can learn about. Just to start, as a context, before I turn it over to our two experts from ETA, the Employment and Training Administration at U.S. Department of Labor, what are the requirements to review and modify state plans? there were two key guidances that were issued, a TEGL 617 on January 24th on reviewing and modifying state plans as required by WIOA, and also guidance issued by the Department of Education's Rehabilitation Services Administration for state vocational rehabilitation agencies, what's called a TAC, TAC-18-01. WIOA requires that states review their plans every 2 years and update their plans based on changes in the labor market, as well as changes in economic conditions or other factors that might be affecting implementation. We have prepared from the LEAD Center a brief on reviewing and updating your WIOA Unified or Combined State Plan from a disability perspective, and you can click that on this set of PowerPoint slides, or find it as well via visiting the leadcenter.org, and we'll go over that again. But let me move quickly ahead to Heather Fleck, Unit Chief, WIOA Governance, Employment and Training Administration, U.S. Department of Labor, and Robert Kite, Director of Adult Services and Workforce Systems at ETA, U.S. Department of Labor, and they're going to take you through their guidance and some key points that whether you're working at a state level or you're working for or part of a workforce development board or you're part of the disability community, I think these next set of slides will provide a context, and then we'll take it from there further. So Heather, let me turn it over to you. Robert, I believe you're going to go first.
Yes, thanks, Michael. Good afternoon to everyone out in our audience. I would like to thank the Office of Disability Employment Policy and LEAD for the opportunity to join you on today's webinar. It's both Heather and my pleasure to be here with you. While our focus today is primarily on the WIOA state plan modification from a disability perspective, it also speaks to a broader ongoing effort to create a more integrated service delivery workforce development system. WIOA places a strong emphasis on planning across multiple partner programs to ensure alignment in service delivery. One key goal is to develop effective partnerships across programs and community-based providers to provide individuals the employment, education, and training services they need. Effective partnering is pivotal to maximum resources and to align services with career pathways and sector strategies. As part of an integrated service delivery team, partners increase the opportunity for better coordination of services, better placement services, and better outcomes for all customers. Participating in an integrated American Job Center network provides expanded workforce services for individuals at all levels of skills and experiences. All customers, including those with disabilities or other barriers to employment, have the opportunity to receive hard and soft skill guidance, career planning, and job placement services, particularly timely labor market demand and occupational information, and a variety of job-driven training options, including work-based training opportunities such as registered apprenticeship, on-the-job training, and incumbent worker training. States play a critical role in this effort to align programs and ensure integrated services through a unified strategic plan and shared governance, as you would say, probably our state plans there. Every state collaborates across the core programs, which is adult, dislocated worker, and youth, Wagner-Pizer, adult education, and vocational rehabilitation to create a single, unified, and integrated strategic state plan. States govern the core programs as one system, assessing strategic needs and aligning them with services strategies to ensure the workforce system meets employment and skill needs of all workers and employers. States also collaborate with one-stop partner programs and other partners at the state and local levels to produce combined WIOA plans. States use the certification process and competition to help achieve this vision and ensure continuous improvement. I would like to now transition into today's conversation on the state plan modification process. The previous slide. Thanks. We encourage you to think about the plan as both a compliance document as well as a living document. As you know, an approved plan is required in order for a state to receive funds for the 6 core WIOA programs. That approved plan is used for monitoring how the state is carrying out the program activities, as well as the use of funds that the state address in its plans. That's the compliance part. States may receive an on-site monitoring visit or virtual visit, or be part of a desktop monitoring during the life of the plan as federal staff carry out our fiduciary duties. As for the living part, we encourage you to think of the plan as a roadmap for delivering services under WIOA. During the life of a plan, states have the opportunity to refine and adjust their efforts regarding WIOA implementation and continuous improvement. Depending on the level of refinement, a modification to the plan may or may not be needed. The key word is plan. So the plan is a document of what the state hopes and expects to implement, but there is an understanding that with the passage of time and changing conditions, adjustments may be needed to your plan. We'll say more on that later. Next slide. Okay. This is essentially the table of contents for your state plan. These 7 sections follow the sections in the information collection request, which is nothing more for a fancy word than saying your plan template. These are the same 7 requirements used for the 2016 plan submission process. They have not changed. During the modification process, states will be able to choose which of these sections require updating depending on the state's unique conditions. Heather?
Next slide. Thank you, Robert, and thank you to ODEP for inviting us today. I'm going to go over more of the sort of technical and mechanical aspects of the requirements for the 2-year modifications. So as was mentioned just a few minutes ago, the minimal requirement in the law is that states review their plans every 2 years and then update based on changes that have happened in the state. And they may review the plan and conclude nothing much has changed, or they may have a new governor, different people at the table, or a vast change in the economy, which would necessitate a change to the state plan. We did put out joint guidance. You saw that on an earlier slide. It was published in January, and by joint we mean with our partner agencies at the Department of Education, which is Vocational Rehabilitation, and the Office for Career Technical, OCTE, which is the Career and Technical Adult Education portion of the Department of Ed. And then the underlying collection requirements have to go through the Office of Management and Budget, and we made slight revisions to that document, which was approved in December of 2017. So those are the source documents if you need to consult them for technical reasons. This slide is showing the deadline, March 15th. That's coming up pretty quick. We use a portal that is hosted by the Rehabilitation Services Administration. It's the electronic system that states use to submit their state plan, and that, again, is open right now for modifications to be entered. And then another requirement for modification is that stakeholders must be included in the collaboration. That's the state board, and then a wide variety of stakeholders need to be brought into the public comment process before we can accept a state's revised plan. Next slide, please. Okay, so the content requirements include updating plans to reflect the implementation of WIOA and to improve areas of the plan that were impacted by the publication of the joint regulations and guidance, which actually has happened since the last state plans were submitted in 2016. And also changes in the state should affect, what a state is looking at when they're modifying their plan. We would hope at this point states are in a much better place to describe progress in revising things such as their data collection and reporting systems, as well as, strengthening some of their program strategies and policies to reflect some experience gained through implementation. The law does require that the state board assist with the development of the state plan, and there are many different entities that are required to be on the state board, and some states may elect to include a variety of disability stakeholders, or they may choose to not. It's part up to the governor, but we know for certain vocational rehabilitation is a required partner on the board. And then, of course, our Title I programs and Wagner-Pfizer programs serve people with disabilities as well, so their interests should be represented through those programs. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned that a few of the requirements had changed only slightly, and that's what was approved by the Office of Management and Budget in December. And these have almost, as it affects the disability community. I think this is a very small impact, but just so you're aware, single area states in the past, and for the prior submission, were not required to include some of the local plan information that is required of them in the law, just because of the timing of where we were in implementation. So those requirements have been highlighted more in this time around, so that those sorts of things get submitted this time. And it's things that would be typically in a local plan, such as infrastructure resource agreements and memorandums of understanding and things like that. So if you're in a single area state, you actually may want to be aware of what those requirements are and see if it would change anything in terms of your engagement in the planning process. We also refined some language around the youth program requirements. It didn't really change the actual requirement, but we found that when in the first round of plans that the information provided didn't quite get to what we were hoping for, so we just refined some language there. And then Title II, which is the adult education program, needed to add an assurance for the Buy American Act, and then they wanted some additional information submitted as part of the General Education and Provisions Act, which I'm not even sure what that is, so hopefully there's not a question about that. Okay, next slide. So once the plans are submitted to us on March 15th or around that date, the law provides us at the federal level 90 days to review and provide a response to the state. Those reviews are conducted across the agencies that have, programs reflected in the plan. So ETA, the adult ed folks at education, the vocational rehabilitation folks at education will all be included in the review process, as will any other programs that a state chooses to include. So, for example, if a state chooses to include temporary assistance for needy families in the combined state plan, then we would have someone from TANF at the federal level included in the state plan review. And similarly for the many other optional programs that can be included in a state plan. Then we'll get those notifications out to states within 90 days on our decision of what will hopefully be an approval. And all the modifications will be posted publicly at the link provided on this slide. The 2016 approved plans are posted there right now if you weren't aware, wanted to check those out, although I think also the DRIVE website has a link to those as well. But again, once the plans are updated and approved, we're going to get those out to the public so folks can do some research and see what states are talking about doing and get some ideas that might be helpful for your communities. Okay, next slide. And I think this goes back to Robert now for some things that we're advising states to think about as they consider modification. And it's not just for this particular 2-year modification. It can be at any time for planning. So, Robert?
Okay, thanks, Heather. As Heather said, things change over time. Economic conditions change over time. Just the overall environment changes over time. There are a number of considerations a state might want to take into account when it's considering what to update in its plan modifications, and many of these changes in economic conditions or environmental conditions are decisions made by the governor or by legislation passed by the state legislatures that affect education and workforce development. As we all know, we live in a quickly ever-evolving world, so we always have to be mindful of change is coming. So there's changes in the labor market, and economic conditions is one of the few things cited in the legislation, updated and revised by the strategies and access whether the changes have affected the strategies that you're using to deliver services. We're familiar that states' economies have been very strong over the last 2 years, and circumstances may have changed in which the needs to fill jobs may have changed among industries whose different populations are affected differently. So these are the types of things that, working with your state labor market information shop, you might want to look at and reconsider. In addition, we know that many states, unfortunately, have been affected by natural disasters during the last 2 years, which may have caused increased unemployment in some sectors or some areas of the state. Taking those factors into account should also be an opportunity for you to refine your strategy or adjust where necessary to differently serve those populations or areas that have been affected. Finally, we know that many governors are new to the state and may have their own vision that they have expressed through different reports or speeches that they've given during the last year or two. State legislatures may have passed legislation that affect perhaps the composition of state boards or the amount of money that should be spent on training versus other services, or have different emphasis that are external to your program's implementation that should a state take into account when looking at an area to modify the state plan. Next slide. There are many considerations for plan modification that are based on programmatic areas and how the state has been implementing WIOA over the last 2 years. States and local areas gain a lot of experience during these last 2 years. Much guidance, regulations, and technical assistance has been provided at the federal level, as well as by multiple stakeholders in our system. And states have new experiences that they can consider for adapting and refining their strategies. You may have identified opportunities over the last 2 years to bring new partners into your service delivery strategy, and you might want to consider how those partners are integrated and explained in the state plans. Some states have changed how they have structuring service delivery geographically, like adjusting local area designations or looking at more regional plans for delivery services. And we would hope that states adjust the state plan to articulate those types of changes. Many of you are using continuous improvement assessments and constantly assessing the success of your initiatives and adjusting your approaches in that regard. We encourage you to submit such information in the state plan. Next slide. This slide provides some resources that you might want to check for preparing the plan modification or preparing for future state plans. It provides the joint guidance that has been issued by the Department of Education and Labor, the link to the information collection request, and different guidance and other technical assistance documents that we think will be useful to you as you're thinking about WIOA implementation. So Heather and I both hope that you found this information to be very helpful, and at least having a better understanding of the state plan modification process and how you might want to consider approaching the development of your modifications going forward as you work collectively to do so.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Heather. We are next going to turn to our panel from South Carolina, and my understanding is we're going to hear first from Kyle Walker, who is Director of Special Initiatives, Director of Consumer Services for the South Carolina Commission for the Blind. He's a graduate of Utah State University and worked in state federal voc rehab programs for 19 years. He will be followed by Margaret Allewine, Director of Planning and Program Evaluation for the South Carolina Vocational Rehabilitation Department. She's been with that agency for 18 years and responsible for managing continuous improvement and strategic planning and quality initiatives, and is currently involved in the Unified State Planning process for WIOA. And then we'll hear from Nina Staggers, Director of Special Initiatives with the South Carolina Department of Employment and Workforce, where she is involved in the implementation of innovative workforce practices. She provides support to the State Workforce Development Board and manages WIOA-funded grants awarded by the board. She has been the agency's WIOA coordinator, responsible for convening state partners to implement key sections of the law and developing the South Carolina Unified State Plan. So Kyle, I think you're going to start us off with talking about the collaborative planning process that's going on in South Carolina.
You bet. Actually, I think we agreed that Nina was going to start off as our Department of Employment and Workforce representative to kind of give everyone a view from that perspective, and then Margaret and I were going to join in and add the disability perspective.
Well, we're flexible, so let's turn it to Nina to start us off. Nina?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar. I want to start by talking about our initial state planning process and then discuss our process and approach for the modification, which we will submit on March 15th. For the initial plan, we convened a number of subject matter work groups consisting of state and local partners to examine specific issues such as system and data alignment and resource sharing, to name a few, and to develop strategies that may be implemented to address these areas of concern. The idea of creating these work groups to facilitate development of the state plan was first introduced at a statewide partner meeting in the fall of 2015, which was well attended. And there, participants were asked to join one or more of the work groups. The ideas and strategies that were developed by these groups were incorporated into the state plan. In addition to engaging partners this way, we also developed and distributed a survey to gain insight on partner roles and responsibilities, key challenges, best practices, and successful initiatives. The information collected from these surveys was also included in and informed the state plan. Our plan was available for comment, and we did receive a number of comments. One in particular addressed the lack of data in the economic analysis and throughout the plan related to individuals with disabilities. Like most other states, we received final approval of our plan in fall of 2016. Although many of the work groups stopped meeting after the state plan was submitted, the core partner work group did not. And the core partners are obviously representational of the 6 core programs under WIOA. There are 4 core agencies in South Carolina that manage those programs. So the Department of Employment and Workforce manages the Title I and III WIOA programs, so Adult DW Youth, and then the Wagner-Pizer Employment Services. We have Vocational Rehabilitation and Commission for the Blind represented on this webinar today that administer Title IV, and then we have the Department of Education that administers Title II. So those 6 programs fall under 4 umbrellas. And those 4 agencies, with the addition of the Department of Social Services, which administers the TANF and SNAP employment and training programs, make up our core partner work group. So we have continued to meet on a regular basis, and one of our greatest accomplishments since submitting the state plan has been the joint development of MOU and infrastructure funding guidance to the local workforce development areas, and partner participation in all 12 of the local negotiation meetings. For the state plan modification, the core partner group is serving as the steering committee and facilitating, deciding the approach and direction of the revised state plan, collecting and compiling new information to include, and working alongside a consultant to develop a finished product. Our approach for the state plan modification is to align the vision, goals, objectives, and strategies as outlined in Sections 2 and 3 of the plan with a recently developed 3-year state board strategic plan. As the state convener of the workforce system, the board has identified 4 key objectives and strategies that align with those objectives. We are not only incorporating these objectives into the plan, but also identifying specific activities that we conduct as partners that align with those objectives and strategies. We feel that this approach creates a stronger system-wide plan as opposed to a plan that is program-focused. Key revisions will be presented to the State Workforce Development Board next week, at which time the plan will also be posted for comment. If there are no questions for me, I'll turn it over to Kyle and Margaret, and perhaps there will be an opportunity to, revisit if there are questions at the end of their presentations.
You bet.
Great. Thank you.
So this is Kyle, and from the Commission for the Blind's perspective, I like the way that Nina presented the evolution of the state plan for South Carolina. I think that prior to the 2016 Unified State Plan, the Commission for the Blind kind of saw itself as the end-all be-all in terms of serving those who are blind or visually impaired, and didn't have a lot of interaction or partnerships with other entities under WIOA. And the Unified State Plan process actually has helped us a great deal to integrate our program into the larger workforce development system, which we greatly appreciate because we feel like we've gained some value from that. Specifically, one of the things that we're doing is the State Workforce Development Board has designed a strategic plan with 4 state plan objectives, and the Commission for the Blind has integrated our main 4 program-specific objectives, and our strategies and goals are all aligned with that larger State Workforce Investment Board strategic plan. We are working more to focus on industry-recognized credentials, and one of the things that has really developed for us out of the Unified State Plan has been the use of labor market information. We partnered with our Department of Employment and Workforce to provide some intensive training to our staff on how to utilize local labor market information. We worked with the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center to implement the use of the Career Index Plus, which is a free online tool for utilizing labor market information and doing career planning. And really the biggest thing is our involvement at the regional level has become a way for us to better understand sector strategies and the South Carolina's talent pipeline project, and understanding what labor market demand is. We are also aligning our pre-employment transition services and our comprehensive transition services to students with disabilities through the partnership, and aligning that with what the labor market demand is. We also have worked very hard to become more present. We're a small agency compared to the Department of Employment Workforce and the South Carolina Department of Vocational Rehabilitation, but we are trying to ensure that we have a programmatic presence at the SC Works American Job Centers. We're also working with those centers to make sure that their programs and the physical locations are fully accessible to the blind and visually impaired. And we're working harder to braid services with and collaborate with those partners under the state plan. The other thing we're working on is a lot of implementation of evidence-based practices such as customized employment, supported employment program that we've recently launched and developed, and working more on individualized placement and supports through the use of the same principles of supported employment that has been proven effective for people with disabilities. We're also working to align ourselves better with the business services units at both the South Carolina Department of Vocational Rehabilitation and the Department of Employment and Workforce, just so that as we provide business services such as assistive technology assessments, workplace assessments, and proprietary software coding that we have the capacity to do, talent acquisition and talent retention, we're working to make sure that those are all aligned with what the partners are doing, so that there's a seamlessness to business services. We also have been doing a lot of work with the technical assistance centers, including the WINTAC and the Youth Technical Assistance Center. They have helped us with implementing a customized employment training program, and the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center and the Job-Driven VR Technical Assistance Center has helped us with implementing our labor market use and career planning. So we believe that the evolution of this state plan process from our initial one in 2016, we feel like we're in a totally different place in 2018 as we are developing our modification.
And let's turn it over to Margaret.
Great, thank you. I will also echo thanks for being able to participate in this webinar today, and we'll also echo a lot of what Nina and Kyle referenced. I think part of the strength of our cross-agency group is in using a very intentional approach to engaging partners and having that collaborative effort among partners. As Nina mentioned, we established a core group of individuals that has really stayed in place throughout that initial planning period and beyond. So I think a key piece of the continuity in going beyond the compliance types of things to really how we are implementing the intent of WIOA comes back to having those designated points of contact, that we continue to keep communication open, that we identify areas that we can partner beyond just what's required, but what makes sense for our state, and build upon those initiatives that have been already in place that we can take a step further. So that helps to provide a consistent message, I think, in going forward with our strategies. We've benefited greatly from the involvement, and I think are able to bring viewpoints and others to the table as needed to make sure we are being very inclusive in our strategies and our perspectives, and also providing resources. Kyle touched on this a little bit, and we've been involved in assisting with the American Job Centers in identifying resources to ensure accessibility, which is a big piece of service delivery, and making sure that as those services are made available, that the physical locations are also accessible to individuals with disabilities. So we've provided some recommendations on accessibility, and in some instances linked our partners with other entities that have expertise and capacity for evaluation of those accessibility standards. I think a big piece of our involvement in the state planning has helped to keep individuals with barriers to employment at the forefront when we're talking about strategies and objectives, and that has been, I think, at all levels. Our state workforce board did put into place a priority populations committee that is heavily focused on making sure that all individuals with barriers to employment are well served and well included in the workforce system. So that is a key piece going forward that we have in place. We've also got a lot of projects and initiatives that we can keep each other abreast of so that we know what's already in place and what we can build upon, both for adults and a lot of youth-focused programs. We also have made use of the technical assistance available. We've been engaged with WINTAC and also have received technical assistance from the Program Evaluation and QA Technical Assistance Center, as well as the Job-Driven Technical Assistance Center, which really has helped to focus our efforts around business engagement and demand-driven training opportunities that clearly align with the sector strategies and talent pipeline projects that are ongoing in South Carolina. So I would just echo that we as a program are aligning with those state-level strategies, and I think the planning process has been a great catalyst for us to bring into alignment a more system approach to not only our planning but also our implementation phase.
Okay, thank you. I think are exactly what, when Congress worked on WIOA, they envisioned this unified effort, collaborative effort at planning and service delivery. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Doug Keast, who is the project director for WINTAC, which you both mentioned. Doug, you want to share a little bit your insights?
Thanks so much, Michael. And I just want to say it's an honor and privilege to be able to join the group of experts that you pulled together for this call today, and also to be able to represent my friends and colleagues with WINTAC and with the other technical assistance centers that have come together to support states and agencies in the successful implementation of WIOA. There's been a lot of investment by federal partner agencies up to this point in the provision of technical assistance and support to states, agencies, and communities with the implementation of WIOA. The leadership of the Department of Education's Office of Career Training and Adult Education and the Rehabilitation Services Administration, along with the Department of Labor's Employment Training Administration and ODEP, is synchronizing the release of consistent guidance to the field together on multiple areas of WIOA implementation. And this really sets the tone for the vision of this act. They work together in national convenings and related initiatives to bring collaborative teams of state leaders from different states to share their implementation strategies with their counterparts in other states is an important and valuable step established to support state and local implementation. Each of our federal partners, in varying degrees and focus, have created technical assistance centers that add to the support of state leadership in their implementation. While we may each have identified those state agencies within our separate funding streams as our primary customers, you can see and understand with the nature of today's discussion how important it is for all of us to support collaborations together and their success. With the Department of Labor's ETA and ODEP, Department of Education and Rehabilitation Services Administration, there are a number of technical assistance centers working on specific areas of focus ranging from youth transition to employment, to career pathways, to business engagement. All of us do so with the structure of WIOA implementation. The Technical Assistance Center that I work with is the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, or WINTAC, and is established by RSA for the purpose of supporting states' vocational rehabilitation agencies in their implementation. But it's also important that the activity coordinates its activity with the other TA centers to support collaborative implementation. Specific to this discussion, in regard to state plan development and modification, WINTAC offers support in a variety of ways, including a checklist on readiness to implement WIOA, active communities practice, and shared examples of state practices and aligning services in ways that will effectively include all populations of job seekers, and for us, especially those with disabilities, effectively in the collaborative career services and career pathway models of American Job Centers. We've worked with outside expertise to develop toolkits to support VR agencies in developing effective agreements required to support the state plan implementation, and are becoming more involved with state collaborations in analyzing and addressing service alignment and integration strategies that are important to the visions that states are establishing in their state plans. This activity has brought us closer to the work of the Department of Labor's ETA and ODEP with their investment in the LEAD Center and the technical assistance they provide with the Disability Employment Initiative. The changes with regard to the increased focus on youth transition for VR agencies has forged a strong working relationship between WINTAC and RSA's and Education's Youth Transition Assistance Center and the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition in support to VR agencies and their partners. The strong emphasis on service alignment within the career pathway models and business engagement brings us together with RSA's Job-Driven VR Technical Assistance Center. WINTAC has a lot of requests for direct technical assistance with regard to the transition to the common performance measures and building the internal capacity for agencies to make those internal changes, connects us with the activities of the Program Evaluation and Quality Assurance Technical Assistance Center in their support to agencies with program evaluation. So, with regard to expanding the system's inclusion of other populations, RSA has also extended additional support to vocational rehabilitation's leadership through the support of the Targeted Communities TA Center and the Older Individuals that are blind technical assistance centers. So that's kind of a quick overview of a number of technical assistance centers that are supported by our federal partner agencies to states and agencies. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Doug. And I'm going to keep us moving along. I'm next going to call on Andy Arias because he is going to, for those of you who are not familiar, take you to the DRIVE website to understand. DRIVE stands for Data and Resources to Inspire a Vision of Employment, DRIVE. And Andy will share with you work he led that allows you to look at state's WIOA plan and also some of the particular language that is helpful to understand where they really focused in on support and services to people with disabilities. So Andy, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I want to share with people today on the webinar that ODEP created a tool to help you think about when you're updating your WIOA state plan. We wanted to make it easy for states to see what they're doing in their plan in regards to people with disabilities. We actually reviewed every state plan. That was a labor of love. Looking for language specifically on disability. We identified some particular important areas that you could compare across the state. For example, we looked specifically for what the state plans looked at in terms of blending and braiding resources, customized employment, Section 188, financial literacy, and other areas. And then we compiled all the state-specific information into an electronic tool hosted on the DRIVE web portal. Like Michael said, DRIVE stands for Data and Resource Inspire a Vision for Employment. The DRIVE website contains a plethora of information, both from a national perspective and a very state-specific perspective and information. This slide you see on the first page of the DRIVE portal, which you see a map of the state. And on the right column, you can see a snapshot of the data regarding employment and disability from various resources. You can also see in the box at the bottom that there are some featured resources, some hot off the press, TA, educational resources, and tools that relate to disability and employment that you may find useful. You can click on an individual state, and now you can see what you can find in the state of South Carolina. Looking at the WIOA profile on your state page will give you state-specific language that was approved in your WIOA plan in all of these different areas. What does your plan say about blending and braiding, about school-to-work transition, about Section 188? Do you have a Disability Employment Initiative grant being implemented? And if so, is it mentioned in your state plan? You can click on any of these topics and find exactly what was approved in your WIOA plan and what it says in each of these areas. On the right side, near the top of the link, you can find a full WIOA state plan. You can go beyond the areas that we chose to highlight and see what it directly says in your full state plan, depending on what you want to search for. You can look at what other state plans are saying in these areas. For example, your state plan may not have language on customized employment or employment networks, but you may think it's important to include. By searching around on the web portal and checking out other states, you can easily find information you need to work with your state leaders to make your state plan even stronger for youth and adults with disabilities. Information on the DRIVE site is continually being updated, and now you can even get an email sent to you if something new pops up in the area that you are interested in. Go to the site to register to get these emails. Go to leadcenter.org and click on the DRIVE link. We at ODEP hope you find this information helpful. It was a lot of work, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to share this with you today. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Andy, and I hope the many hundreds of people who are listening to this webinar today, if they've not heard of the DRIVE portal, I hope you will take a look. The next part of this PowerPoint really picks up on what Andy said and really what all the presenters so far have talked about. This is a modifying of a state plan that was produced some 2 years ago. So what has changed? In some cases, your state legislature may have passed new laws or even an executive order on employment first or disability employment. There may have been new focus on different training models that have been used related to individuals with barriers to employment, including individuals with disabilities. There may be new efforts that are underway worth highlighting on cross-system collaboration and coordination. There may be opportunities to talk about how business relations within each of the regional workforce development areas has leveraged different types of community partnerships and built relationships that also extend to some of the disability support and service delivery systems, whether that is intellectual and developmental disabilities or behavioral health or others. It really is an opportunity to take stock of what's changed and to consider how can we reflect those changes in this set of modifications or revisions to the plan that was submitted 2 years ago. Again, the opportunities or ideas to consider go down to the level of youth, including children and youth with disabilities, K through 12, and as was also mentioned by some of the speakers, labor market information may have dramatically shifted, and there may be trends in terms of new growth industries, new opportunities for individuals with disabilities to be part of career pathways that may not have been so fully explored 2 years ago. We live in very dynamic changes and times that really an opportunity to look at these multiple areas. So I wanted to run through those couple of slides very rapidly because I want to turn to questions and have the opportunity to have our different presenters perhaps share their perspective in answering a couple of questions. I'd urge you who are listening out across the country, if you have a question, to put it in the chat box, and we'll try to address some of those as well. Okay, so question number one is, one major purpose of WIOA is to increase access and opportunities for the employment training and support services that individuals, particularly those with barriers to employment, need to succeed in the labor market. What efforts, and maybe I'll start with our South Carolina group, how is your state plan looking at assisting and moving your state forward in increasing physical or programmatic accessibility in the workforce development system, in American Job Centers for people with disabilities? Would one of you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, this is Kyle. I'll jump in there. I think that we're currently engaged with all the American Job Centers throughout South Carolina right now in renegotiating our infrastructure cost agreements, and I think that that process in and of itself has helped us to have conversations about physical and programmatic accessibility. That process has actually jump-started, I would say, about 5 or 6 of the centers to request officially from us an assistive technology assessment, and we're, of course, as part of the partners in the program, we're stepping up with trying to make sure we can provide whatever accessibility, whether it be software or other types of items, to make sure that the centers are fully accessible to the blind and visually impaired.
And this is Margaret. I would follow up on that. We have a good number of staff that are co-located in the American Job Centers with varying schedules, but they see individuals both that are referred from our partners there, but also have some dedicated office space where they're seeing clients on a regular basis. And I believe that assists with making sure on the front end we consider those accessibility issues and address those.
I wonder if, Chris Button, you may want to speak a little bit about the cross-agency work inside the Department of Labor in terms of updating the Section 188 guide.
Yes, thank you, Michael. ODEP has worked collaboratively with the Employment and Training Administration and also the DOL Civil Rights Center, as well as all the American Job Centers across the country, to collect examples of promising practices and effective strategies that the centers are finding are useful and work in terms of providing meaningful and effective service to people with disabilities and ensuring accessibility of those programs and services. The resulting work is called the 188 Disability Reference Guide, and it was released in the summer of 2015. When WIA was still in place. We are currently in the process of updating the guide to make it consistent with the WIOA, and that means not just changing all the references to the various legal citations, but we have gone out again to American Job Centers to collect additional examples of successful practices, including around accessibility of the programs and services within American Job Centers, and those are being incorporated into the 188 Disability Reference Guide. That guide is almost ready for clearance. We are, once DOL is comfortable with it, we're going to be sharing it with RSA, with our colleagues at Department of Ed and at HHS before it is released again, and we do hope to have it released by July in honor of ADA. Thank you, Michael.
All right, let's go to question number 2, and this maybe I take back to Robert and Heather, is from a federal perspective, how can people with disabilities or program providers that support people with disabilities become engaged in the planning process and planning discussions?
Thank you. I think that at any time folks from the disability community should try to engage at all levels of the workforce system. It doesn't just have to be during a required modification time, although that, of course, is an opportune time, but I would say never stop trying to engage, because as South Carolina demonstrated, their conversations are ongoing and they're always thinking about that engagement process. So it's a continuous improvement thing. But at the moment, for the modifications themselves, if you haven't been engaged, find out who is engaged in your state, and contact your state board. The state boards are in charge of convening the partners. Also, look out for the posting of the modification for public comment. That is required, and that is an excellent way to get a handle on what the state is proposing and to give your input there. So, and anyone can provide public comment. So please check that out. I know some states are getting ready to post for comment. Others have it posted now, and you know, so keep an eye out for that. But again, don't wait to engage. Also, state board meetings are required to be public. You can attend those. Look for a schedule to be posted on your state's public web pages, and you can show up to those. So encourage those many different ways to engage.
Yeah, Heather, I really like the point you made is, yes, this is this very short period of time that states are working on plan revisions, but the disability community, disability leaders from different organizations, really, this should be a year-round engagement, and this is just at a point in time, certainly an important point in time, but both state and area workforce development board meetings are public. As you mentioned earlier, you and Robert, that some state boards, some local boards have created a subgroup or work group on disability, others haven't. Either way, there's an opportunity to really raise the visibility of issues in terms of whether it's access to services or it's different concerns about getting the skills development to be a part of inclusive career pathways activities, all very important. Let me go to question 3. And let me ask Nina, what are 3 things a state can do to engage the disability community in all facets of the Unified Plan development?
Well, one of the things that I failed to mention in my presentation was that our State Workforce Development Board is one that has created a Priority Populations Committee. And that committee is obviously looking at opportunities to improve access to the SC Work Centers, which is the brand for our American Job Centers. So improving access, increasing usage of the system and the centers, and any policy development that needs to take place in order to ensure that that access is there for individuals with disabilities and a variety of other priority populations. We are in the process of identifying individuals or entities that need to participate in an advisory committee capacity for this committee. And I know that sounds really convoluted, but obviously understanding that all of the board members sitting on the Priority Populations Committee don't necessarily have the subject matter background that the individuals on this webinar today and those across the state of South Carolina could bring to the board. And so understanding that, they have agreed to stand up an advisory council for their committee that will really inform them on the subject matter that they don't have the background for. So we are, as staff to the board, already in the process of identifying what those entities may need to look like. And that will be something that we also bring to our core partner group to say, you know, is this list inclusive of those individuals that need to be at the table for the advisory council? So that's certainly one way for all stakeholders to participate in the planning. And since we have really tried to align the state plan with the board strategic plan, I am confident that even as we go forward and we have ad hoc committees and advisory councils that are bringing information to the board, that information will ultimately spill over into future revisions of the state plan. You also mentioned, of course, being present at state board meetings, being present at committee meetings, which are both open to the public, participating through public comment. As I mentioned, we did receive a public comment quite a lengthy comment last go round and really walked through all of those and did make revisions to the state plan based on the comments that we received from this organization that advocates on behalf of individuals with disabilities. So I would say those are kind of the top ways. We are thinking through, you know, getting the document ready for submission through the portal, but not stopping there, and what might be the next steps to actually work the plan as opposed to just submitting it and not revisiting it. And again, that's where I'm really pleased to say that it does dovetail with what the state board is doing. And after they submitted the strategic plan, they began to work on committee action plans that identify key performance indicators and objective measures for each of their strategies and objectives. And those objective measures are as we speak, being turned into specific project plans. So actionable items that can be worked that will help the state board meet those strategies and objectives. And part of what the thought process needs to be for us as a core partner group and even a larger stakeholder group is how can each of the entities that make up the system, like what is their part in the action plan? What is their part in ensuring that as a whole the system reaches the strategies and objectives that are outlined? So we know that there's a compliance piece where we've got to get this plan submitted through the portal on March 15th and, you know, address all the questions that are outlined in the guidance. But then there's this second piece for us in South Carolina where we are committed to actually working the plan and moving the ball forward that way.
This is Kyle. I would just add one other thing. I think every state tends to have some existing stakeholder groups, whether it's a governor's committee on employment for people with disabilities or an employment first initiative group. Usually those groups are existing and are meeting, and I think finding a way for the state workforce board to actually invite those entities in at times to get that kind of feedback from them, I think that's important as well.
Great. I'm going to jump to question number 11. And question number 11 is there something from your work collaboratively in South Carolina you'd like to highlight as a kind of aha moment? You're working together, you're working with other agencies as well, both public and private. Is there something particular you're extremely proud of that has gone very, very well?
Well, this is Kyle again, and this may not be an aha moment for the other core partners here in South Carolina, but it definitely is for our agency, and that's just we had not been utilizing labor market information in any kind of real way, and we were very much siloed and away from understanding what the demanding jobs, the demand, and what industries are in the different regions. And I think that where we are today after our 2016 state plan, I think that at least my counseling staff are utilizing labor market information in a much more robust way to provide informed decisions to the consumer.
Okay. Let me go to question 12. Which really takes up, as you've just mentioned, really looking and analyzing current labor market data and trends really helps identify where the skill gaps are for individuals with barriers to employment, including individuals with disabilities. I know since WIOA started, we're only beginning to see some of the reporting on performance. But is in South Carolina, do you have enough data yet to actually utilize that to help identify some revisions to the plan you're going to submit to US DOL? Or is it still too early?
This is Nina. Our state plan does include in the economic and workforce analysis a discussion of skill gaps, so to speak, for individuals with barriers to employment. And we did revise that section a little bit to better align with the priority populations that have been identified through data by the Board Priority Populations Committee. And what I mean by through data is looking at the definition of individuals with barriers to employment as outlined in the legislation, and then using data to determine those individuals or those barriers that are most prevalent here in South Carolina. The Priority Populations Committee has landed on 7. And so we align that section, we revised that section to better align with the priority populations that have been identified by the State Workforce Development Board. I will also add that just as Kyle was talking about, using more labor market information, we have been now almost 3 years working toward developing a talent pipeline using a sector strategy framework. And in both phases 1 and 2 of our state efforts, we have completed a very thorough data analysis in phase 1 to identify key statewide industry sectors that are showing positive growth currently and in the future. And then in phase 2, looking at a supply analysis. So we knew from phase 1 what the demand was, but in phase 2, really looking at what is the supply. I think to more specifically answer your question, we do have an opportunity in our state plan, probably as we look to a complete overhaul in the next 2 years, to even further refine that section of the economic analysis so that by barrier we are truly addressing where the supply is and then looking at strategies to address the gap. Because I think that what the data is probably going to show us is obviously in these barrier categories, the unemployment rate is probably a lot higher. But is it because the supply isn't there, or is it because there's some other issues that we need to overcome, like working with employers to hire individuals with disabilities, or working with employers to hire someone with a criminal background? So those are some of the strategies that the Priority Populations Committee wants to focus on, but is really still in that phase of collecting the information that they need in order to reach some of those policy conclusions, and that's why they've recognized the need for having this advisory council that can better inform them on some of those issues.
That's very helpful. I'm going to go to a question. It's not among our numbered questions, but to just give Heather or Robert an opportunity to, from the federal level, states are right in the middle of it. The short turnaround, March 15th, these revised plans are coming in. If you had just one piece of advice to the states that you might add to your earlier comments, what might that be?
Wow, that is a hard question. I mean, I think this is just an opportunity to say, where are we going where we thought we wanted to go 2 years ago? And if so, and your goals are the same, great. It's a reflection opportunity. And if you're seeing that your goals somehow were not the goals you really wanted, or that, things have changed enough where you're like, we need to reconsider this. I mean, I would say that's my piece of advice, is just use it as an opportunity to reflect and do a temperature check, if you will. Like, are you where you want to be? And if not, how are you going to get there?
This is Robert, and I would add to what Heather said, is to think in terms of continuous improvement. Although 2 years ago what you submitted you thought was good, but also go back and take a look at it and say, what can we actually do better now based on resources, changes in the community, changes throughout the state, and so forth. so that you can move to where you would like to be if you're not there yet, or to think in terms, how can we even be greater than we are now?
Great. And we did get a few questions. I know we're short on time, but one question that came in is, WIOA services only for youth 18 to 24? And the answer to that is no. There is a youth services component, but there also is a very large focus on working age adults with disabilities. Another question came in, how can a disabled individual who wants to go back to work or looking for career change utilize the WIOA program to his or her advantage? And I do know that there is such a wealth of material both on the ODEP site, on the leadcenter.org site, on the technical assistance centers, the WINTAC that Doug Keith shared with us, and ETA has its own program of workforce GPS that has an enormous amount of material that can be helpful. Absolutely, a person with a disability, if they're unaware, should be visiting their local American Jobs Center, and I think we'll find a lot of opportunities to look at a career change or returning to work. In our PowerPoint, we had a series of recommendations, some of which we covered, about get engaged with your state and local workforce boards, identify what's the opportunity for cross-system delivery, look at customer flow in terms of what happens when a person visits an American Jobs Center, how do the integration and collaborative nature of service delivery, how does it all come into play? And certainly if you're a workforce development professional, there should be ways to utilize customer feedback for continuous quality improvement. You want to understand your state's metrics for performance and how is that impacting service delivery and outcomes for people with disabilities. And you want to look at any laws and regulations and policies that might be impeding successful achievement of workforce development goals. Hopefully, if your state, at a state or local level, has not created a work group that is for looking at the challenges and opportunities in changing economic environment to bring more people with disabilities into the workforce in good paying jobs, in career advancing jobs, you will be talking with, or if you represent the Workforce Development Board, invite leaders in the disability community to present on what they see as the challenges as well as opportunities for becoming a part of the workforce development system. So those are some things. We have a list of additional resources towards the end, now up on the screen. And we do want to let you know we have an upcoming webinar series that I hope you won't miss in March and in April, is about AJC certification and Section 188, a window of opportunity to impact equal opportunity policy and practice for individuals with disabilities, March 7th, March 21st, and April 4th. And if you are with us today, we'll be sending you more information as well, and to others, about this very important series, which will feature people from states in charge of the monitoring and development of the certification process and the application of Section 188. There's never enough time to cover all the things that we'd like to cover, but I really want to thank our presenters from South Carolina, our presenters from the federal level as well, and also for Chris and Andy representing Office of Disability Employment Policy. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope if you're from the disability community, you're stimulated to get more involved with this plan revision, with the public comment period, which is going to be happening right now in all states across the country. Do look at this brief that we developed, reviewing and updating your WIOA Unified or Combined State Plan from a disability perspective, because it has some very specific action steps with websites you can visit if you don't know where to find your state plan, if you don't know how to get involved in the public comment period. It will take you there. Again, visit the DRIVE portal, because you can access each state's or your state's WIOA current state plan and look at what it already says about services and supports for people with disabilities. But this is an opportunity to expand and refine and build on what was that initial plan that was approved by U.S. Department of Labor, and get involved and stay involved. The results in this kind of economy, which is growing, we have record unemployment. We have also record employment gains in the last 22 months for people with disabilities, but people with disabilities still are far behind people without from entering the workforce across market sectors. The workforce development system is a critical support system that can be helpful, and the workforce system with vocational rehabilitation, with adult education across multiple federal agencies and across multiple state agencies are trying to bring the intent of Congress to be implemented, and that's a unified system, a coordinated system of service delivery that really understands that equal opportunity means equal access and supports for people with disabilities, and in fact that with the focus on matching labor data, labor market trends, that people with disabilities have an opportunity for skills development and inclusive career pathways. So with that, I think we are out of time, and really appreciate the hundreds who joined us today, and keep visiting our Lead Center website for these additional series coming up in March and April. We hope you've learned something. We hope you're going to get back more involved. If you're in the disability community, or if you're from the workforce development or vocational rehabilitation system, you realize, wow, we have a lot we can do together, and we keep getting better at it. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.